when I became the CEO, so at the time of the merger, we only had a team of 40 people.
Wow, yeah.
And we merged with a company that was about 8 times the size of us. And so we went from 40 to 400 overnight. And because I was like the front line from a sales perspective and kind of face of the business, because like you said, I did a lot of chatting. What that meant is that the CEO that approached us to do the merger, he was about double our age. And he said, Frank, I want you to be the CEO.
Gotcha.
And I was like, yeah, cool. I guess that's what I'm doing now. Like it kind of, there was probably the right mix of naivety.
Yep.
And so I wouldn't say in any way, shape or form would I take took on the role of like a traditional CEO because I didn't have that skill set. I was about 27 years old. And so, my thing was I was always in sales. And so the way I thought about it was I was externally selling. Now my role is like internally selling.
For sure.
How do I get the best out of the 400 team members, inspire them the best they can, best they can be, and ultimately try and, help drive in the right direction. But there's plenty of learnings around what it actually meant to have that, to have that title.
Got you. And why do you think he made that call? Twice your age. He obviously saw something, right?
Yeah, hopefully. So I think it was, to be honest, it was a succession plan. I think what my learnings was from that merger is they didn't have a succession plan in their business. We started then taking enough market share that it was like, okay, if we don't do something now, in 5 years' time, that it's going to swap and we'll be the smaller company. And so me having, I guess, the name in the industry, he chose me because people already knew my name and knew our business that was coming up.
Gotcha. So it was just a bit of energy.
Yeah. I was a highly enthusiastic, fast-talking little young pup.
Perfect. I've clearly worked, right? Now, take us through your early life. So South African.
Yep.
Okay, would you just follow sport, rugby?
I don't. I'm boring in that aspect.
That's right. So what's that one? Do you follow South Africa, New Zealand, Australia? Anyway, take us through your early life.
Yeah. So my early life is my parents have very itchy feet. They moved very often. So I think in South Africa they moved like something like 23 times. My eldest brother Ken, he never was at a school longer than 2 years.
Wow.
So change was like in their DNA. I couldn't tell you why, but they just love moving around. And my dad he loves a deal. He loves making a deal, but he was a nuclear scientist at one stage. He was in the army at another stage, and he always loved business. And unfortunately, the business partner he had in South Africa actually turned out to be a fraud, and he went bankrupt.
Gotcha. And
so my early life, although I don't remember it that clearly because it was super early and super young, was, they essentially did whatever it took to create a life of opportunity for us. So, going from being a nuclear scientist to then in New Zealand, you filleted fish. My mum sharpened knives.
Yeah, gotcha.
And they picked apples on the weekend.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so we there was even a period of time where 5 of us lived in a caravan because that's, what they could afford.
Yep. And
so the most important element that shaped me was, I guess, seeing how hard they work, seeing the sacrifice, and then also have a deep, considering my age, a deep commercial understanding around what it means not to have money and how fast money can stretch. And so I always reflect, it's probably one of the strongest suits for me is being very comfortable with the conversation of money. So when we started the business, I was 20, but I had no big scare factor negotiating, commercial terms because throughout my entire childhood, we would talk about money around the dinner table.
Yeah, gotcha. Wow, it's a pretty solid background. Yeah. Now, it sort of goes on to the next part. Who are the top 3 people that have influenced you?
So let's park the obvious ones, which is going to be my parents and my brothers, absolutely. And let me go to the people that are external. I never had mentors when I was starting the business because I was so young. My brothers were young too. It just wasn't something that felt natural to go out there and get. So I think there's probably more what I've heard the term now that I can use is like a digital mentor. Gotcha. So who are the people that I was tracking and following and inspired by? My first one, and he's a character, so don't judge me and everybody listening for this one. But the first one who made a pivotal shift in my business was a guy called Grant Colhoun. Now, Grant is just an excellent salesperson. He has got an incredible business selling salespeople courses, one that I believe is like $180 million a year recurring revenue. It's crazy. But I bought his course for like $2,500, and that's how I learned to sell. So that would be the biggest shift. The next would be a guy called Gary Vaynerchuk. So Gary, very well known, and it was all just around brand and the power of personal brand, as well as he's got a high degree of like emotional intelligence, and then I am going to bring it back to my brother Ken. So my brother Ken, he is I've never known anybody apart from him who is as diligent and as disciplined. So like he started training, going to the gym when he was 14, and he's like never skipped a day never skipped a week unless it was a scheduled week off. Right, like so I always laugh because he'd be really easy to assassinate because you know exactly where he is at exactly every minute of the day. But he taught me a lot in those early years around like what true discipline looks like, what day by day, and like that shaped a lot of me, is seeing that hard work and then seeing like the fitness and health element that went along with it.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So you've actively taught yourself. Obviously, you're got a personality to chat, but you actively taught yourself how to sell. It sounds like as well. So you sort of did the study.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was like a big part of it. Like, I say I was comfortable talking commercial terms, but it's a whole different kind of ball game going in. And I guess that initial cold call, the pitch, the get in the door. And so like I would practice every morning, for a couple of hours before I went to work, and it'd be like scripts and dialogues, and Grant's message was a lot around like use car salespeople and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I had to kind of figure out how to adapt that, and how to essentially, okay, here's my 5 scripts I'm going to practice today. Do it. Reflect. How do they land? Do they feel like authentic to me? And then repeat the process. The process. And I'd say I get a question often these days, which is like, Frank, great, you get access to these amazing people and potential mentors, but I'm starting in day one. What can I do? And I think that is exactly where I was. I guess I didn't hear enough about this concept of mentor that I went out searching for it. And so the reflection for me is like, there is so much content. There is so much learning to be had. Sure. And I kept that process, and I do that today. I do that today. Like literally every day, I will listen to at least an hour worth of podcasts on something that I either want to learn. It may be about business, it may be about health, fitness, whatever. It's just like a continual iteration process, but then actually do something about it. So there's the concept of, it's essentially like, what is it? It's like self-help porn. It's like you're listening, you're listening, but you're not doing anything. I think the key step is like, okay, cool. You've heard that podcast, you've heard that idea, you've heard the takeaway. What's the one piece that I can implement tomorrow? Test, measure. How was it?
Yeah.
It didn't work? Cool, no worries. Try something new.
For sure. And if you can pick up one thing.
Yes.
Sorry, I won't mention the book, right? I finished reading a book last week and didn't like the book at all, right? But there was 2 things I took from it and thought, actually, that's pretty useful. The two items.
Exactly.
What's actually interesting? Back in my early days, I've worked in the gym, selling gym memberships.
Awesome.
And the script was the number one thing, right? Yeah. Because you'd have to cold call.
Yep.
And you'd actually get thrown sort of left field things. And by having that script, it just gave you that structure.
Exactly.
Interesting if many people do that these days. Actually have that script. It's probably on a computer, right? But it used to be written down and you follow it.
Yeah.
It's an amazingly useful skill in sales, just to have something in front of you to fall back on in the conversation.
And then using that same process to go like, the script you're going to find online is not going to be perfectly suited for your business. So it's like, what is the self-reflection that you're doing post to go, okay, which parts of that worked? And then like it becoming organically and naturally better each and every time.
For sure. Yeah, I like it. Okay, now keen to hear about how you and your brothers built Real Hub from a fintech business to one you sold for 180 million. Just a little bit of the backstory, but some of the pivotal moments are pretty cool to hear about as well that ultimately led you, where you are today.
Yeah, no worries. So it was pretty loose in terms of how we started. I guess that ingrained ability to change that came from my parents just made us not scared to make the leap. So I was a chef, 20 years old. My brother at the time was a real estate photographer, and he says to me, hey, I reckon I know there's a company in Melbourne we can go do real estate signboards.
Gotcha.
And within like weeks, we had literally packed our bags, bought a ute, and from a 3-bedroom house in Melbourne, just started this business.
Gotcha.
At the time I had a budding love and early stage career of being a DJ. I had to sell my decks, and that and a 10 grand credit card is all we did to kind of start. The key there though was, because we had then no salaries and there was no financial backing, it was just like the path to profitability was just the most important piece.
Why did you launch Centuria Funds Management, Century Funds Management, which was the precursor to Centuria, and what was the problem you were solving?
Yeah, look, it's a funny story. It's a little bit by accident. So when I left my dad's sort of JV, I went to work for a guy, John McBain, and his business partner, and they had a company then called Hanover Property Group, and what it was sorting out problem real estate after the 90s crash. So early 90s, massive real estate crash in Australia, a lot of developers and property owners went under, huge vacancy, at interest rates at 18%. So the sector had a lot of tough times. So John and his business partner set up this consultancy to try and sort out problem property for the owners or for the banks. Gotcha. So before a bank went MIP, they'd call Hanover in to try and lease up the building and sell it, or finish off a half-built industrial development, things like that. So we were doing that. So I came in just as a junior guy helping them do that, and we had a lot of clients. But back then you didn't really have REITs. It was all the insurance companies that we're dealing with, a few privates, and then the banks. It was really interesting work, because there was so much, there were so many issues out of that 90s crash. And then John sort of split with his partner. I went with him and said, let's build up the consulting company. And one of our first jobs, so a lot of people know Greg Goodman. He runs Goodman, which is one of the biggest industrial fund managers in the world. So over $80 billion of assets. And at the time it was called Goodman Hardy, and two Kiwis, Greg Goodman and Duncan Hardy, owned it, and they'd set it up. Back then they probably had $100 million of assets, which was reasonable size back in the mid-90s. And they were Kiwis, so on a Friday we'd go around to their office, have a beer. Anyway, we'd just gone out together on this new sort of consultancy, and they said, look, we might have a job for you. We own a little shopping centre out west in Minchinbury, which is out towards Penrith, Blacktown, out that way. And it's needs some work, needs to be leased up, and we want to sell it. And so probably as a favour, they said, here's a job, go do it. So it was a tough gig. It was an older style asset. It was two-story walk-up, brown brick with the car park in the middle.
Gotcha.
Right, probably the only known tenant in the whole thing was Blue Haven Pools. Other than that, it was just, no brands. So we leased it up, and then it came time to sell it. Anyway, we took it to the market, and we got one bid. And it was from an accountant out of Brisbane. And he wanted to do a small high net worth syndicate around it. And he'd never done one, but he wanted to do one. He was our only buyer. So, there's a big fee riding on it for us. So we thought, let's give him a good hand and try and introduce him to people, help him write his IM. So off we went. So between we were helping him along the way to raise this money. And came time for him to go unconditional on the contract, hadn't raised equity. So he came back for an extension. So we went and saw Duncan and Greg, said, he wants another month or two. They said, fine, keep helping him, try and get him there. So 2 months later, came back, still hadn't raised equity. Went back, got another month. Anyway, another month went by and he hadn't raised it. So we go in and we said, look, he wants another month. They said, we're not giving it to him. They said, he's had 3 extensions. It's ridiculous. So they said, look, you got $1. And John put out $1. Back then you had a few coins in your pocket. And he said, you've got a 3-month option. You're doing half the work. You go do it yourselves. And so that was so we had to raise $3 million. It was a $9 million purchase. It was returning 14%. It was back in the day where you got tax-free. So it was 180% tax-free. So all your income from the property was tax effective. And then you got another 80% of other income. So we went out, we had to raise $3 million. It was bloody hard. We used every day of the 3 months, but we got there. And that was our first fund back in, that was 1998. Yeah.
Solid. Yeah. I mean, that's how a lot of businesses start, right? You got to scrap.
That's right.
Raising $3 million's hard.
Yeah, it was bloody hard now. Yeah, and then you look at, some days we might, go into the listed markets, raise a few $100 million overnight. Yeah. It's been a big change.
Everyone starts somewhere though, right?
That's right.
Good on you. And we talk about Centuria. Like, what's your secret to maintaining competitive advantage?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few things. I think the team we've built is really important. Because we started back in the day, it was John and I. John's wife was the accountant and a receptionist, basically, and a property manager. So there's basically 5 of us. And, we now got 430 people. We've picked each one. So we've grown the business and we've had a really intense focus on who comes into the business. You don't always get it right, but even now, like even for the most junior roles, either John and I will be the final interview just to try and make sure it's a good fit. We've built this fantastic team. It's been a really stable team. One of the cool things I think we did in the GFC. So in the GFC, obviously you hit property pretty hard, and you saw every property company was just sacking whole floors of people, right? We didn't have a big team then. We might have 30 people, but still, it was hurting us. And I remember talking to John. I said, "What do we do?" And he's like, "Look, this won't last forever. And when it turns, if we've got rid of half the people, it's going to take a long time to build back up." So we went to everyone. We called a meeting, and everyone thought that the axe was going to fall. And we said, "Look, we don't want to get rid of anyone, right?" Yeah. And all their friends were getting fired left, right, and centre around the industry. We said, what we want to do is if we want to do something different. If you've got a salary above 120,000, we want to cut it by 10%. If it's under that, it might be 5%. You'll make that up in options in the company.
That's good.
And you get an extra week of leave, and hopefully it's only 12 months or so. And John and I took a higher percentage. And everyone was relieved because everyone thought everyone's going to be fired. So what it meant was when it did turn, all the other property companies had to rebuild, and we were ready to go. And that's when we got a lot of growth coming out of the GFC. So I think one thing's the team, and part of that is also what we do differently to quite a few of our larger competitors is what we call our property services division. So we do everything from the facilities management, so having that guy on site that looks after the lifts and the aircon and talks to the tenants about the issues, through the property managers, asset managers, leasing and development and everything else. But a lot of our peers would have the asset manager and up. So they'd outsource the facilities management, property management to a Jones Lang or a CBRE or something like that. And, it's not a big profit driver, but what it does, it means you've got the direct relationship with the tenant. So if he likes the building, doesn't like the building, needs less space, more space, you're hearing firsthand, you're not hearing through an agent. Yep. And I think it means we get better property outcomes. So we get better retention, we get better tenant satisfaction and those sorts of things. So I think that really does help us with our portfolio. We've got 430 buildings, we've got 2,500 tenants across the portfolio.
That's enormous. It's a massive business. And so back to the decision on the staff in the GFC. So did that create a bit of loyalty with the team?
I think so, definitely. And look, it's amazing. We've got, we have awards and things as you get through year 5, 10, 15. And, we've had our first couple of 20-year. We've got quite a few 15 years in the last 2 years, plenty of 10 years. So it's been great. And you look at the team, and if you look at the senior guys, the top 30, we've probably had 2 people leave in the last 7 years, and they both just left recently for, they got really high, senior roles in other companies, which we couldn't really give them. But we've had really good, stable, loyal team of people.
It's an amazing decision, right? During that, I was in banking in those days, right? And it was carnage. And it's one of those as an entrepreneur, which you were. It's kind of a bit of risk and return, right? Like you're thinking of the personal side of it with your staff, but it's a risk, right? You were probably paying out greater in salaries than your competitors. Yeah. But by taking risk and it's calculated, you've looked after your staff, and the return, it sounds like, came in that post period. Yeah, it was good. It's a solid decision.
It was, and I think because especially John being 20 years older than me, he'd been through a few cycles before I had, and he was like, "Look, it always seems darkest just before dawn, and it will turn, and when it turns, it turns reasonably quickly." So it was a smart decision at the time. Definitely.
Good on you. Let's take a step back now away from Centuria world. Take us through your Kiwi, New Zealander. Talk us through your early life and career journey.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Auckland in New Zealand, one of 4 parents. So my grandparents on both sides were immigrants out, so Croatian and Lebanese. Great grandfather came out as a child, and great grandmother, they got sent out as 5-year-olds basically when there was no money back then in the sort of late 1800s, early 1900s. I think he was a stonemason building churches and things back in the day. And then, the old man got into food, so meat, like a primo, like a small primo. So bacon, ham, small goods. Started off with one small bankrupt butchery that he bought out of uni and sort of built it up into quite a big, listed company. Sold out in the end.
Great.
And so I went through school in Auckland, went to Auckland University, and Dad had invested some bit of dough into this development company in Sydney, and hence the move across.
What has worked and what hasn't across the journey? Maybe touch on a couple of things that haven't worked, because that's often where you learn some of your biggest lessons, and then talk through what's sort of your big wins.
Yeah, so I think I think the key to the success really is kind of being sort of true to those initial ideals of, doing the right by the client, and the rest will follow. When we had no clients, as every advisor will attest, you just overservice the ones you've got. So, and I think that same sort of client-centric, service ethic is what's probably carried us through. And, we've kind of tried to build the culture around that. So I think that's worked. I think the other thing is that sort of post GFC really pivoting to go from being a financial planning business to being an investment business. And we still do the planning. We still make sure all the right money is in all the right buckets, and we still, make sure super contributions are done and pensions are paid and all that. But our real value add is the investment management stuff, and we make that pretty clear.
Yeah.
When we pivoted to that and started to work really hard on, making sure that we had good investment opportunities for people and, good things that they can invest in, and working harder than just putting them into, broad-based ETFs or whatever, we ended up being able to attract a client type. And that client type was always going to be more commercially beneficial for us than, perhaps the mass affluent world was ever going to be. So, excuse me. That was actually really important in terms of what worked really well. And then I think the other thing was as we got bigger, I said before that, I now wear two hats. Once upon a time I wore 6 or 7. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, I brought in a GM and a head of ops, and our business has basically doubled in the last 4 years as a result of that. So, bringing in really good people to do all the bits that you don't want to do, that will always do it better than what you can do it, is really important. So now from a systems, infrastructure, sales force, governance perspective, the business is better than it's ever been. It's lower risk than it's ever been. It's more profitable than it's ever been. So, get good people around you and make sure you reward them well enough and make sure they understand they're actually part of the success.
Gotcha.
Maybe the bits that haven't done so well, or we haven't been, we're 20 years or 21 years into this journey, and we do only still have 4 advisors. We've got 4 advisors doing almost $4 billion of assets. We haven't been great at really scaling it up. I kind of look at our competitors in our market, Coda, Crestone, Escala, sort of Morgan Stanley, and they seem to have this ability to kind of go and recruit and drive recruitment and get new advisors in to have big books of clients. We've struggled with that. We've struggled, and whether we've struggled to get them in culturally because our expectations are too high, or whether we haven't paid enough, or whether we haven't had the equity model for it. So certainly over the next 2 or 3 years, our real focus is to kind of go from the sort of 4 senior advisors and 2 junior advisors that we've got now to trying to bring in 5 or 6 new kind of senior guys. We've sort of tried to tweak our REM schemes, and we're putting an ESOP in place, and we really want to kind of grow our advisor base because we've got fantastic, we've got a great platform for it. So we've got great systems, and we think we're a great place to work, and we've got great market appeal, and we've got lots of people kind of banging on the door wanting to be clients. We just need people who can service those clients, but we need them. We need them to come in and have the same ideals that we've got. We need them to have that same kind of client-centric, client service ethic that we do. And what I found in our industry, in the nicest possible way, good guys have got good jobs.
Yeah, sure.
But there's lots of people who are probably a little bit overpaid and a little bit undersmart. So in
Yeah.
our world, so
Yeah.
you know, we want to go and find really good ones. We'll grow a few of our own.
Yep.
But we probably haven't been that successful at doing that. So that's certainly one thing that
Gotcha.
you know, we've got a goal on over the next couple of years.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, you've got the platform, right? You got the brand, reputation. You're well known in the marketplace. It seems a logical next step.
Yeah.
Sure, it'll go well. Hey, now back to a little bit of personal thoughts on things. How do you define success? How are you achieving it? And touch on maybe personal and workplace, and then some tips on how others can. So sort of your views on success, how you're achieving it, and then some tips for others.
Yeah. So, look, I think from a personal point of view, success is happiness. I think it's, you know, being fulfilled in what you're doing and enjoying what you're doing. I think no value putting your feet on the floor every morning and kind of going, I don't want to do this, like, or this is a grind, or this feels like a chore, or whatever it is. And you know, we're really aware that we go to work to finance the rest of our lives. But you know, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, if you don't get some level of kind of, you know, intellectual stimuli out of what you're doing, if you don't enjoy the client conversations, then don't do it. Go and do something else. So that, you know, I think from the business's perspective, for us, success is having good long-term recurring revenue-paying clients. You know, we're lucky enough now that we're mature enough that 90% of our revenue or 95% of our revenue is ongoing client revenue. We think that makes us a really sustainable, successful business. And also given the way we kind of, you know, sort of treat the clients and how, you know, we try and become part of their world and part of their family, we think that the clients will support us through, you know, periods as well. You know, I think that makes it sustainable. It makes it valuable. It makes it a good place to work. And then I think just, you know, the other thing that sort of defines success is that over time you need to be successful enough that you make room for other parts of your life. You know, we were talking before about, you know, you wanting to have been a hobby farmer and enjoying kind of, you know, pushing posts into ground and pulling fence wire out and all that sort of stuff. You need to make, you know, you need to be successful enough over time to be able to make time for that stuff. Otherwise, what was the point?
Yeah, I agree.
So, and, you know, I've got things that I like to do outside of work, and I've got young kids, and, you know, it's important that the work-life balance piece is right. I've never been a believer in the kind of, you know, work smarter, not harder. Yeah, work smarter, but work hard as well, because then all the other things are far more fun as a result.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. Now, top tips for those looking to level up in business?
I think, so number one, I think you absolutely kind of have to know your market, like know your addressable market, know what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. I would say that, you know, my level of success or revenue growth or whatever changed probably 5 or 6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to, rather than try and be everything to everyone, I took a view that, you know, I'm going to start to tell the market exactly what I am and what I want to be. You know, I want to be a high net wealth, ultra high net wealth guy, a guy that looks after clients with kind of 5 to, you know, 100 mil of assets. You know, we want to be investment guys and we want to be relationship guys. And that's the sort of work that started to come. I think, you know, being really kind of unequivocal about who you are, what you are, how you want to do it is really important. And secondly, you know, my view on everything is, you know, kind of bite off more than you can chew, and then kind of chew like crazy, and then just be super honest about it. You know, like if a client rings me and says, "Hey, what do you think about this?" If I don't know the answer, I'll just go, I don't know. But I'll come back to you. And then it's incumbent on me to work hard to go and either find the answer or come back to them and find someone that does know the answer.
It's so funny, isn't it? A lot of people think they got to have all the answers. I mean, often it comes with maturity. You realise the person on the end of the phone is probably just like you, just wants an answer to the question and doesn't expect you to be an expert. And you say, oh, mate, I don't know. But I'll definitely come back to you. That's the key. As a good sort of relationship person, just come back when you can find out.
Yeah, look, honesty goes a long way. Honesty, kindness, and care go a long way, and people will absolutely value that and they'll respect it. Because again, like I said before, the clients will assume I can count. They'll assume that I know how to put a portfolio together.
Yeah.
They'll assume I understand how risk works. But what they'll really value is the fact that I actually give a shit about them and their situation.
The area that we focus in, like everyone talks about risk and reward, investment. I think why I focus like this small, mid-sized sort of area from a business point of view is most of them are profitable. Not all of them, but most of them. They're doing some good stuff, but just need help in a different way, or to push it forward, or to sell it, or whatever it is. That to me, there's a certain there's less risk to me about that.
Yeah, I understand.
Versus like I know VC guys might make 5 out of 100 bets that they make. That's a different level of risk. But for me, you've got to understand the risk that you're playing in, but there's some key things you can think about to try and mitigate that. But at the end of the day, yes, you've got to take a calculated risk based on a whole range of things, but you've got at some point take that risk.
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's okay. Some people will want to do it, and some people don't. And there's times when you really, you'll find yourself in circumstances where you have to go well beyond what you thought to actually make sure that the asset is right, or the business is going well, or someone needs to change, or that's what I mean. That if you're sitting up owning 100 or 200 or 500 or 600 or $1 billion business, there's processes, there's corporate stuff that's all involved, and great.
Yeah.
You can probably afford to be a little bit more passive, whereas if you're down in a mid-market stuff, you just got to eyeball things. You got to understand it and see, hopefully make it successful.
Yeah, I mean, there's often only 1 or 2 levers that need to be pulled, right? They're generally resource constrained, whether it's financial or human. And if you can step in and provide one of those 2, that could be the kicker that makes the difference as well.
That's right. Yeah,
and that comes with some experience, right?
Yeah. But outside capital, I'd say people
for sure.
Almost number one. If you get that right, great. If you get that wrong, it makes it hard.
For sure.
Because you haven't got the affordability of a big balance sheet or just a big profit line to say, well, let's get rid of that person and go for that. You're backing you're backing some key people.
Yeah, and I mean, often it's a race too, right? Like, kind of when do you run out of money for one thing?
That's right.
How quickly you can get a profitability.
Correct. That's right.
Fair enough. Okay, now looking at top 3 people that influenced you, whether it's early life, career, workplace, what was it about them?
I'd say first, I know it's a little bit cliche, the 2 most people had probably big influence on me, which has probably shaped my thinking.
Yep.
I think my father, in some respects.
Yeah.
My dad was a country solicitor.
Gotcha.
Grew up, in that whole 50s, 60s, 70s era. And was very just matter of fact and just, allowed me to learn to be, shit happens in life,
Sure.
And you just got to, not everything go right, and you just got to keep stepping through and just take it through. The other one was probably one of my, I suppose, key rowing coaches who helped me make my first Olympic team. The very philosophical, just, there's stuff we stay on the surface, but I think, you've got to dig down in yourself and try and find some deeper answers. And he was very good at that, especially when you're rowing and you're trying to take yourself above and beyond what you think you're capable of.
Yeah.
I think he was really critical. And look, I suppose from a business point of view, who do I wouldn't say admire most, if you like, or just look at being admired of, what they've done. I'll probably generalise this. I've been absolutely fascinated by the power and the strength of your big tech businesses.
Yeah.
Amazon. I know it's different, but you just sit there half the time, like Jeff Bezos and stuff, and go, they've done some extraordinary things to have those businesses in those positions.
Yeah.
Like, they're bigger and badder, they're just so much, they're big in a lot of governments around the world. You just look at them and you go, they are really hard to beat.
Well, you look at it and go, like most businesses, get tired and someone takes over. But you look at it and go, who takes over that business? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? The interesting thing on tech is that, when you're thinking about a new business you might launch, one of the first things you think about now is scalability. And sometimes I look at business like a Xero, for example, right? They've built the tech, you just log online, you download the tech, and it's sort of nearly infinite. Obviously, they've got to keep investing in the technology to add the next widget. It just feels infinitely sort of profitable and scalable because of technology.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, in our era, that's what's changed a lot, right? We
It's
talk
changed
about working
radically.
pre-GFC, but even earlier than that, tech started to become the big, game changer. And it definitely, that's accelerating. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you want to learn more about alternative assets, there's a book here you can read, How You Grow Your Wealth with Alternative Assets. Now back to the episode.
But look at Microsoft, for example. I think it's a great example of, say, using AI. Like, something might start costing you $20 a month. Well, they can put that up by 20% each year.
Yeah.
And people are just going to accept, paying for it. Like, there's not heaps of businesses in the world that just accept I'm going to get charged 20% more each year in there, and I can do it through data, I can do it through product, I can do it through like it's just phenomenal.
Well,
Really.
I just grabbed a coffee before it cost me $5. I don't remember coffees costing $5.
Mate, we've got better coffee down here in Melbourne, so that's
true.
why it costs
I actually assumed that was the case. Right, a couple of pivotal moments in your. You've talked about the people that have influenced you. There's actually a couple of days or weeks when you go, that really turned the dial in hindsight.
I think if I go back to when we started the wealth business, I think because we started, like, it felt for a period of time there, I nearly had to shut up the doors because GFC was on, everyone was screaming and all sorts of stuff was going on. Probably some point in 2009, I felt like, hey, we just had to hang on, fight our way through, scrape our way through, and we got there and continued on with the success of that business. So I think that would be a pivotal moment. Yeah. I think there were points last year. Again, we were able to complete two, probably our biggest transactions, for FinCap, and part of that again being a very, very difficult year. I think I probably learned from just hanging on. Just, I don't know what the word is, just fighting, pounding the pavement, talking to as many people as possible, and eventually some people will support you and others won't. But I think that has helped definitely to come into 24 being hopefully in a better position with some of these things. But also there are things you still got to fix up and get organised. It's been difficult for some portfolio companies that you've got to keep sorting out. But I'd say that's the pivotal moment last year. You go, well, no, I still think what we're offering is just really compelling for a lot of private investors. Simple, easy to understand, good Australian businesses. And being part of that. But I'd say they're two pivotal moments from a business point of view.
No question about that in business when you're starting. Like, I'm 7 years into my business, and it's sort of that saying, it was always darkest before dawn in a way, right? You've got to keep, if you think you've got the right trade, you've got the right business, there's a rationale for existing, you do at times just have to keep grunting through, and it tends to always be a light. You may not be able to see it, but it does pop up. And if you stop, you're never going to see it. So I do get that logic. Now, we chatted at the start a bit about FinCap. We might just jump back there for a minute. Now, what's the why behind it? If you're to try and wrap it up in a couple of sentences, why do you do it?
Why I think is that I genuinely enjoy helping working with people in this small, medium-sized market. There's a lot of wealth of that in Australia. And there's a lot, I've seen it through our wealth business, that people are looking to sell down, succession plan out, a whole bunch of these great businesses that no one knows about. We only really hear about X number of percent on the ASX listed markets. We just don't hear about these great businesses. And we deal, like a range of accountants get to see these fabulous businesses. And they only come to market, or you don't know when they come to market. Like, there's not really a market. So you got to, again, dig around, find, stuff and deal with your partners to try and find. So I genuinely like helping it and then creating something. Now, what the beauty of the capital markets these days, there's more options available than just doing an ASX listing option if you want to exit.
Yeah, for sure.
P guys are here, secondary market, all different options. So you know that when you get into these things, I know I've got to get it at least to a certain size.
Yeah.
That means I've made hopefully good money, a good outcome for everyone. And if I can do that, I don't need to wait for it to be, $1 billion business. So if it gets to that size, great, unreal.
Yeah.
But I don't need it to be like that. I can get it, make really good returns, push it along the right pathway, get the next level of capital in. Typically a lot of our transactions, we look to bring, an institution or a semi-institution with us. So we do it on a co-investment basis. So sort of giving that pathway forward, to what happens next, through the transaction.
So I did a lot of restaurant and bar work while I was traveling. The hours suited, so I could end up in a place or a location, be able to tourist around during the day and then work at night time. So I didn't love hospitality. I found it difficult.
Gotcha.
So for me, it kind of really was just a financial basis. But the one thing that hospitality did really teach me was hard work and what that actually meant, and that I probably didn't really want to do that for the rest of my life. So that was really interesting. And then I jumped across into bookkeeping and finance.
Gotcha.
And I loved that. I loved the structure. I loved the numbers. I loved the overall coming of success. How do the numbers make that work?
Yeah.
And the one thing that I noticed very quickly is a lot of my clients were very hardworking people, but the numbers didn't reflect that. And so for me, I kind of thought, well, how does physical hard work and passion equate to financial success? Because it's very difficult to marry the two. So how do you do that successfully? A lot of really hardworking people, motivated people, passionate people are not financially successful.
For sure.
And so then I thought, well, I'd like to try if I could do the two. And so ideally for me, construction came around. I fell pregnant with my first child after I was married very, very quickly, which was very unexpected. And I thought, well, if I'm going to survive in Sydney and support a family, how do I best do that? And so it really was a case of using two skill sets. What did my husband's at the time skill set provide, and what did mine, and how do I marry those two? So really that was the foundation of Puch Construction and Building. It was solely financially driven on the basis of how do I support a young family and how do I remain in Sydney. It didn't have grand plans or designs or ideas that it would turn into the company that it had, or that the journey would take me to where it has. It literally was a case of how do I work smart and hard, and how do I make that financially viable? So it really came down to those two things.
I can say that's the one thing about entrepreneurship. You can work your hours, right?
Yeah.
And as a parent, working parent, it's one of those jobs where you can actually make it work.
Yeah.
It's tough doing 9 to 5 for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
So you can work the hours that make sense.
Yeah.
Now, talking about people that have influenced you, if you were to pick, top 3 people that have influenced you across your life, it could be in your personal life or in the business world.
Right.
It's interesting to hear.
Okay, so oddly enough, there was a judge that I met I think I was probably about 19, and he was around 60, I think, at the time. And I met him working through hospitality at night time. And he was very profound in shaping my thoughts, I think. He taught me a lot of really valuable life lessons that I've carried all the way through. So very, very grateful to that man. And the fact that he took time and energy to spend that with me was really quite phenomenal. As far as business goes, I don't really like to look at too many people. I don't like being clouded by other people's thoughts, ideas, the way that they do things. And I think that ideally for me, the best way to learn is to be able to critically think, risk assess and solve things on my own. So I tend to really veer away from mentorship and I tend to stay away from looking too closely at really successful people, because what works for them often might not work for me, and I'd like to do things on my terms, right? So if I'm successful, it's because I've done things the way that I've wanted to do them, not sort of looking at other people and how they do it.
Hey, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe on whatever platform you're using. It helps us build a community. We want to educate investors, and this is what it's all about. A lot of people have mentors. A lot of the young kids these days have their 5 or 6 mentors in different areas of their life, which I think for some people is valuable. But I kind of like your thinking, right? You got to learn on the run, and you can get tips and lessons, but you've got to do it yourself. No one else is going to do it for you.
You do. And I think for me, the greatest gift that really gave me was critical thinking, risk assessment, and knowing how to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And also one of the other big things, I suppose, that you learn is that you're not reliant on other people when things go wrong.
True.
It teaches you the ability to be able to quietly within your own capacity, mental capacity and emotional capacity, to be able to work out what the problems are and then come up with reasonable solutions that you can try. That doesn't mean all of them will work, but you can certainly pivot and make it work if it doesn't. So I think that's really such an amazing asset to have, where I don't feel that I need to pick up a phone and call someone and go, gosh, I'm really stuck with whatever. I can go for a run, or I can go to the gym, or I can sit quietly and go, right, what are the issues? Why aren't they working? How do I make it work? So I think that's really, really important as a successful person to be able to do that.
Yeah. I think that links into decision making, right? Like you do your own assessment. You've got to make decisions.
Yeah.
And, a lot of decisions in business are hard, and the worst thing is obviously not to make one.
Yeah.
And if you can form your own views, do your own analysis and make the call, whether it's right or wrong, you just got to get most of your calls right, and then you'll be moving forward.
Well, it's interesting just what you've said, because the other thing that I've learned is that there isn't right or wrong.
Yeah.
There's only fallout, and you have negative and positive fallout no matter which decision you make. So I used to worry about that quite a lot in the earlier days. Have I made the right decision? Is this the right thing to do? Across multiple different scenarios throughout the week and the month and then the year. And I kind of really realised about 7 or 8 years into business, I'm not sure if that's fast or slow, but I realised very quickly that there is no such thing as a right decision. There's smart risk assessment, where you assess the risks, and then when you make your decision, there is always negative and positive fallout. So really it's a case of driving the positive and then really working out what's not working and making it work. So I kind of don't sweat those decisions anymore, not for a long time. I kind of just look at it and go, do you know what? Doesn't really matter which way I'm going to go here. The risk is the same. Which way do I want to go? Which way do I feel passionate most about going with? Because there will be fallout no matter what you do. So, so it's a really interesting thought,
Yeah, I mean, so even if it's clearly the wrong decision, it's more about the next trade, the next decision.
Exactly.
So which path do you go down?
Exactly.
Because you can make a comeback from bad decisions.
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
And you have outside influences as well, right? And they're forever shifting, and you can't control those. So just because you make a decision, be it in finance or construction, there are so many outside factors that will affect that decision. You really need the skill to be able to go, well, that was the right decision, but it's not going to work given what's happened at the moment. Or you go, well, that was the wrong decision, but something's coming in where that's actually going to work. So I'll hold 5 and just see how it rolls out. So, it's interesting.
Gotcha. Okay, so this next question is probably more relevant for you. So you mentioned about the judge that sort of gave you sort of some direction, influenced you.
He did,
If you think about your career, what were a couple of pivotal moments?
Oh gosh, do you know? People always ask me this. I'm not sure how to best answer that. There have been so many. I think the most important one that nearly sent me under within the first 3 years of opening the first company was overcommitting to contracts and not having enough cash flow to be able to fund them. Back then, banks didn't want to know me, and why would they? I wasn't a sure bet for them. And so it really came down to a case of, well, how do I then problem solve that? So I did problem solve it, and here we are. But that was really a critical decision for me, where again outside factors contributed, but really it wasn't the shortage of work, it was the shortage of cash flow to be able to deliver on the work. So when you're faced on those kinds of decisions, you're kind of like, well, in 3 or 4 months' time, the cash flow will be awesome, but now it isn't. So
critical.
really difficult back then. So I think that was a pivotal pivotal moment. Had I not been able to do that effectively, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today. I think the other one professionally for me was certainly starting Charlie's Interiors and having the ability to be able to just shift how the buying and selling market, development market presents in Sydney. And I really feel quite passionate about that. So I'm very grateful that I went ahead and did that regardless of what the feedback at the time was. So I think that was a really important decision to make as well. And that has led on to other journeys. I think that's it, really.
Yeah. Sounds like for you, it's not so much pivotal moments; it's lots of moments.
Well,
Constantly making decisions and progressing.
Do you know? I think I'm one of these people, honestly, where I love excitement. I don't like to be bored, and I love using my brain. And so, for me, if things are too stable and too easy, I will then go and look at doing something else. So I'm super grateful. The senior management team that I started with 16 years ago are all still working with me now. So I have incredible support across different departments and divisions. I certainly couldn't do what I do on my own. But I think the funniest thing that they always say is each time I go away overseas on a trip, they're like, right, what are you going to come back and make us do next, right? So they've kind of adjusted to well, she's done that and it's working really well. Something else will come in where she'll go, right, we're doing this now. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Sounds like a bit of fun.
I like it. I like it. You know, what's the point if you're not enjoying what you do and you're not mentally stimulated and you don't have a passionate about the next day or the next week?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem a lot of point to me. So
go hard. You know, don't die wondering. Have a view on what you think is going to make whatever you do work. Differentiate yourself, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to do that's different from my competitors?
Gotcha.
How do I create an edge? And whether that's you as a person, a strategy, why are people going to come to you rather than the guy beside you or the girl beside you?
For sure. It's career differentiation, effectively.
Different career differentiation. Why you? And build on having a niche. Build on doing something differently.
You only think about the hiring process, and you would have hired a lot more people than me, but quite often you'll sit and look at 2 or 3 people and go, they're kind of the same. And there's such a subtle thing that tips you. It's sort of like they're kind of, they're involved in this social group, or they've played that sport, or they've read this book, or they've done this study. So kind of the differentiation is critical, because there's a lot of people that look exactly the same. Look and behave and act exactly the same. Not from a physical appearance, but just what's written down in their experience. So I get it.
Oh, I remember when I first joined Deutsche, we had a whole lot of people that came from all over the world, but in reality, they all looked a lot like me. They were sort of middle class, relatively well educated. We all thought the same.
Yeah, for sure.
And there was a lot of Marks and Johns, Andrews. And we did a whole reshuffle of the team. And this guy who I mentioned earlier, Zaram Rolia, came in, and we got rid of a few Darrens, Marks and Steves, and we hired some Nihals and some Nitans and some different things. Yeah. And boom, Deutsche Bank was their number 1 in FX for the next 10 years in a row.
Yeah, gotcha.
But a diversified team that weren't, like I said, you can see a lot of people that all look the same, and you've got to have diversification that gets on.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, if you're enjoying this, please leave a review. It's really important to us. We're trying to build momentum around education, and better reviews will get more people coming and listening. Now, getting over the personal definition of success. What do you think success look like?
Oh, look, it's winning. It's being on the podium. But, you've got to set what you think is the podium. I had a podium when I was at NAB. I had a mental podium when I was at Deutsche. I've got a mental podium now. I'm trying to build a stable coin. I want $1 billion in the stable coin. Jelly C are working with the digital asset manager. We want 500 mil under management.
Gotcha.
Right? So those are, for me, you define your own success.
Yeah,
and pick your own benchmarks and then go for it.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, you've got to set those goals right. You're better off setting them and getting close, right? Setting ambitious goals and getting close and not achieving them, at least you've set an ambitious goal.
Oh, look,
like it's easy.
if you get halfway there, it's okay.
Well, for example, you want $1 billion, right? You set a goal at 100, you could get 100, you go, well, that was okay. But you really want $1 billion.
Yeah,
you
but
be
I
$1
don't
billion.
want 10. 10's fail.
Yeah, gotcha. Somewhere in the middle. Now, again, a little bit philosophical. What legacy are you living and leaving?
Oh, 3 nice kids.
Gotcha.
Yeah, look, I've got 3 wonderful kids. I'm very lucky that, nothing's gone wrong with them, and they're great. I've had a lot of fun in markets, and that period that we both worked at Deutsche Bank was just a wonderful period. I feel a bit sorry for Deutsche Bank now. I feel sad, which is, but there was a golden period there, the early 2000s, up until actually it's probably around the European debt crisis of 11 and 12, where because Deutsche came out of the GFC pretty well.
Yeah, for sure, particularly Australia too. Right?
Yeah. But it was just post that, the European debt crisis, 2012, 13, where it lost its way a little bit.
I look back at that period. I was at Deutsche. It was a machine. It was a machine in rates, FX, and really in credit.
Credit.
They were really good in structured credit, vanilla credit, trading credit, all sorts, and they were miles ahead of anyone in Australia.
Oh, yeah. It was a wonderful organisation to work for.
Very good. We're on to some quick round questions. Now, we're on to we've talked about your career. I want to hear about your first job, and I'm talking about the absolute first job, early days. What did you get up to?
Oh, look, I remember doing a few jobs when I was going through uni as a barman, but one that always remembered, I worked at a sleeping bag factory, and my job was to stuff the feathers into the different pockets of the sleeping bag. So I'm in Canberra, I'm in a tin shed, it's 40 degrees in summer, and I'm up to my neck in down trying to weigh 50 grams, because these were high-tech sleeping bags, and putting all this down feathers, and you used to get out, you'd be itchy as all get out, but you had to do it basically in your underpants, or it was too hot.
Yeah, got you.
But yeah,
that's a pretty interesting one. That sounds like one of the worst.
Sleeping bags with feathers.
Yeah, I did have at a work experience job. I had to get the cheese off the conveyor belt. Sorry, cheese out of a bucket and put it in a conveyor belt. And that was, they do that 2 weeks work experience when you're a kid. Year 10. I did that for 2 weeks, and I thought, I'm never ever coming back. I'm never eating cheese, and I'm never coming back here again.
Oh, yeah.
But at the end of the day, everyone's got to have a job, right? This stuff's got to get done. So
paid well.
Good on them. Yeah,
stuffing sleeping bags with feathers. Yeah, paid well.
Okay, piece of advice for your younger self, aside from not doing that job.
Paid well. It did pay well.
Yeah.
A piece of advice for your younger self: focus a little bit more. You can achieve a lot when you focus.
You agree? What motivates you most as a person?
Oh, look, I love winning. Like I touched on before, I love being on the podium. So you've got to set yourself up so you can, whatever you're doing. And I've been spoilt in my career. Bankers Trust, I was on the derivatives desk. They were number 1 in the world in derivatives. I had, 12 years at Deutsche Bank. 10 of those 12 years we were number 1 in the world in FX, and I was in the FX business. And that was fantastic. And, NAB, we got up from 4th of 4 in the markets business to the number 1 markets business, right? So very focused on what you got to do to differentiate and how to get on the podium.
Gotcha.
And I've got to do that for GLC and Catino, which is the stablecoin thing that I'm doing.
I'm going to go off my fire questions. So think about that. You've said a number of times you like winning, you like being on the podium. Tell us a time, right, when you didn't win, but you know you can. What do you do, right? You come second, you come third. You're sort of taking a hit, didn't get to where you wanted to be. How do you get back up and keep going?
Oh, yeah, there's a few times. When I came back from Japan at Deutsche, I ran the global, what they're called, listed derivatives business at Deutsche, which was all the futures exchanges and the equity options exchanges.
ETOs and stuff like that,
Yep, around the world. And literally we made $200 million, 200 million euros a year out of that business. But Goldman Sachs made $1 billion, JP Morgan made $1 billion. It's like, what are they doing to make $1 billion that we're not?
Yeah.
And that was frustrating for quite a while. And look, I never got there because I moved back to Australia. I got offered the job at NAB, and that was I don't know, it was a ticket home that I knew my wife wanted me to take.
Fair enough.
But, that's something I would have liked to have spent a few more years on because the size of the prize was $1 billion business and we were making 200 million euros, so $300 million at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think my take on it is you got to be resilient, right? Like, if you want to be on the podium, it's not easy to get there.
Well, mate,
so you
if it was easy, like everyone would be doing it.
The old saying. Yeah, you got to take your hits and move on.
Yeah.
Now, what are your tips for driving long-term wealth?
Oh, look, he's going to sound a little bit weird or not conventional. Don't diversify. And what I mean by that, you got to place some bets. What are the things that are going on at the moment? Usually we get one technological development every generation. So every 20, 30 years, 30 years ago we got the internet, and you had different things 30 years before that. We've got now blockchain and AI hitting at the same time, right? So you've got to take a disproportionate bet in your portfolio on AI / the blockchain space. And if you look at the compounded returns of the NASDAQ, last 2-3 decades has been about 17%. S&P has been about 12%. Russell 2000's 8%.
Gotcha.
So if you go focus on what's at the pointy end of what's going on at the moment, AI is actually going to force people. So more and more asset managers are going to use Copilot or whatever in their portfolio decisions. Their trustees are going to tell them to do that. And AI is going to say, why aren't you invested more in tech? Or why aren't you invested more in this? And why do you have this big, wide, diversified portfolio? Why don't you go here? It's going to drive money into the best performing assets around the world.
Yeah, true.
AI will do that. So you want to put your money in. I think you've got to have, here's my safe pot.
Yeah.
But maybe you had 5% in emerging markets or 5% in your alts. I think that percentage has to go up into the stuff because AI is going to direct money to where it's growing the fastest.
Makes sense.
And you look particularly, if you look at the size of the GDP that's going, the EM, emerging markets world, is now more than 50% of the global GDP. So AI is going to direct money into EM. And people traditionally go, well, look, I'll have the last 5%.
Yeah.
But watch that space.
Yeah, it's not an unreasonable view, right? Like, kind of, it's a good way to think of it, right? A little bit different.
A little bit different. But
A little bit more concentrated.
AI for the next 5 years is going to literally change the world.
Yeah, so follow a thematic, I guess, to a degree.
Yeah, follow the thematic.
I would say I'm more probably a practical economist. So I like looking at data, cross-checking it with what I hear from companies. I've got some favourite indicators that I definitely rely on that are real indicators, job ads being one of them. And so I like thinking about understanding what's happening, why it's happening, which has been very important.
What are your favourite indicators? You obviously mentioned job ads.
Job ads, yeah. I've always found, like, if there's less jobs around, then unemployment goes up, interest rates go down. It's a very, very reliable indicator, and vice versa. If there's more jobs, they tend to go up. The other one is the NAB Business Survey, which is very similar messages to job ads, but if they're both telling me the same thing, I'm very, very confident in how I think the Australian economy is performing.
I used to like the non-farm payrolls out of the US. It used to be one of my favourites.
Yeah, I still look at that and analyse that every month, and about another 10 US labour market indicators.
And so what happened after RBA? You went into the banking world?
Yeah,
you went via Qantas as well, right?
Yeah, that was quite a while afterwards. So I actually went to London for a while because I decided the RBA, there was a few bureaucratical issues that I rebelled against, and so I just decided I'm going to London. I went there for 3 months, and then a friend rang me up and hired me to what was before Deutsche Bank. It was Bain and Company,
Yeah.
the Australian stockbroker.
Yep.
And I was very lucky to work under a legendary economist, Don Stammer, there.
Oh, really?
So he was my first big mentor in markets.
He's very influential. I actually have never met him, but I work with his son, Ben Stammer.
Oh, yes.
He's
you know
obviously a
Ben.
very influential bloke because Don's name pops up quite often.
Yeah, he was great, and he's so into customer service and presenting really well. And I don't know, I think I went to his last ever business lunch recently, and he said it was his 10,000th business lunch. I don't know if that figure was true or not. It probably is
could
pretty
be,
close
right?
to it.
Yeah.
But you never knew if you were a customer when he came in to present to you on the economy, whether you were the 50th presentation he'd given that week or the first. He always had that enthusiasm. So that was really, really important, I think.
Hey, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe on whatever platform you're using. It helps us build a community. We want to educate investors, and this is what it's all about. Well, that's actually on my next topic, actually. A few people have influenced you through your career. So Don Stammer.
Yeah.
And then any others?
Well, look, I've been very lucky to have a lot of great people to work with.
Yeah.
At Deutsche it was Don and Steve Kennedy, who's a big bond trader, and I still speak to
Is that
Steve.
the Steve from Deutsche Bank?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Steve. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a super brain.
Gotcha.
Like he's interested in everything, including medicine. And
Yeah, wow.
so we still discuss markets a lot.
That's great.
And then, so that was quite a while. Also, Mark Jolly, I don't know if he was around, but and he was from Tassie, another great Tassie economist. So they were really, Deutsche in those days was a really interesting place to work.
Yeah.
And then I left there. I went to Qantas because I'm into planes and flying. And I really always wanted to be a pilot, but I knew I never wanted to live in work in the Air Force.
Is that just to get away from Tassie or get on the plane?
No, I love planes. I love being in them, and I've got a license, but I didn't want to join the Air Force. I thought I'd be doing push-ups forever.
Yeah, gotcha.
And then that was a really difficult environment. It was very political.
Yep.
I'm not, I think one of your questions is what aren't you good at, or what's tripped you up? And I'm not very good at office politics or being political, and that was a highly political environment. So I ended up there consulting to Virgin in the global financial crisis. Some of the biggest calls, I think, I thought there was going to be really big recession when I was at Qantas because I was following the US housing data. That
Makes
was
sense.
right. My big break was predicting inflation would collapse in Australia in the early 90s. I was, the first economist to predict that.
Gotcha.
Don Stammer worked out that was really big, and we had a really big call on
That's good.
much lower inflation.
Yeah. Is the economist, is it a bit of a club? Like in the banking world, do you hang around with economists from other banks? Is there a little economist club?
Yeah, look, there's people that you know from Treasury and the RBA that are, you have a degree of collegiality there.
Yep.
And then there's competitors. So you tend not to be
Gotcha.
as, unless they were already your friends before they got
so it's
there.
a competition aspect.
I think
You're sort
there
of trying
is
to
a
form your own-
competition,
your
but there's
own
also there's people you respect a lot. I think Bill Evans was always a very, very good economist. Saul Eslake, still a very, very good economist.
Yeah.
And they were, at different times Bill was a competitor, but I always respected him. Others, I didn't have as much respect for. So
Two well-known names. Yeah. Very good. How about a couple of pivotal moments it can be in your life, your career, a couple of times in the dial?
certainly the inflation
so that was
call
a
at
big
the
call.
early 90s that the market was expecting the quarter 1 1990 inflation print to be 0.8 or 1 or something, and I said no, it's going to be 0.2 or 0.1, and I think it was that.
And how did you come up with?
low.
How did you call that? Is that just your own analytics?
Well, I got the last two horribly wrong,
Gotcha.
and I just don't like being wrong.
Yeah.
So I spent a weekend in at work working out why I was getting it wrong and going right down into the detail.
Gotcha.
And then I worked out what was happening. Interest rates were actually measured in the CPI, and they'd been going up a lot in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I worked out if they stopped going up and fell a bit, inflation would collapse from 9 to 3.
Gotcha.
And it was, as long as interest rates came down, I think it was 3 or 4%.
Yeah.
Guaranteed, it was mathematic. Nothing needed to happen.
Yeah.
I was absolutely certain about it. So
Gotcha.
it's sort of a bit of the maths interest.
Yeah.
But the driver was I didn't like being wrong. So
Think about being an economist. You got to make decisions all the time. You have to make a call.
yeah.
People are looking to you to sort of make the call. Have you always been good at making decisions, or do you think you learn that on the way through?
Probably I'm not. I would say I'm not really very good at making
Gotcha.
decisions. But sometimes, like 3 or 4 times, there's been big calls that I think the data has really told me,
Gotcha.
and no one else has been thinking that, or very few people.
Gotcha.
But the data, I trust the data. A lot of people, form views and then torture the data or
Understand.
interpret everything to form their view, and I think that's not good as an economist.
Gotcha.
You need to go the other way around.
Gotcha. Yeah, I understand. So you're not necessarily making a call, you're just verbalising the facts that you found.
Sometimes a lot of it. You have to interpret them and cross-check, and interest rates, you have to make calls, but the data will generally guide you on that as well.
Makes total sense. And as far as business, you mentioned one of your jobs, you sort of didn't enjoy the politics, you weren't good at it. In the workplace, what do you enjoy? Sort of what drives you in business?
Well, I also I still like being right and getting the top ranked economics team and calling the Reserve Bank right. And I really like talking to customers and customer service. So so that's important. So it's the challenge of being right about the market and also servicing customers and doing a good job for the institution I represent.
Yeah. Well, I know back in my banking days, the economist was critical to the sales process. He'd often go out to a client and sort of the economist would take the lead and sort of provide their views, and then it'd get sort of macro down to micro. So it's a critical part of the banking and finance world, right? A critical cog in the sales process.
Yeah, I always thought of it as research sales.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a very good door opener.
Yeah.
And if you can attract a customer to your bank, that's an annuity stream. And salespeople have to do a trade all the time. But I think research is undervalued. I think certainly my recent experience, sales is valued higher than research, and I don't agree with that as much.